From deep within the undrained Republican-filled swamps of Florida, this is the Krassencast, defending what's left, with hosts Brian and Ed Krassenstein.
And welcome to Krassencast, episode 17. The Democratic field for 2020 is certainly a crowded one, filled with great ideas and amazing policy proposals. The last 2 weeks, we interviewed two of these Democrats vying for the nomination in 2020. We interviewed Seth Moulton and we interviewed Marianne Williamson. Today, we have with us yet another candidate. Joining us today is Democratic candidate for the 2020 presidential election, Andrew Yang. Andrew, it's awesome to have you join us today. Can you briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Andrew Yang. I'm running for president as a Democrat in 2020. I am one of 10 candidates to qualify for the primary debates in June and July based on both polling and grassroots donations. We're at over 110,000 donors.
So I think we're up to now 23 candidates vying for the nomination. What makes you stand out? What makes you different from everybody else in the field?
Well, I have a different background than all of the other candidates. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm focused on the problems that got Donald Trump elected in 2016, which is that we'd automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, all the swing states he needed to win. And my friends in technology know that what we did to the manufacturing jobs, we will now do to the retail jobs, the call center jobs, the fast food jobs, the truck driving jobs, and on through the economy. And if anyone's heard about me and my campaign, they know that my flagship proposal is that we pass a universal basic income, a freedom dividend of $1,000 a month for every American adult starting at age 18. So as you can tell, I've got a very different both background and focus of my campaign. I'm trying to improve the lives of tens of millions of Americans in the most direct way possible.
Yeah, I want to get into the freedom dividend here in a second, but I personally consider myself a futurist, I guess you could say, someone who dissects current trends and then predicts where the technology is going to place us in the near future. Clearly, you do the same. Could you tell us a little bit about which technologies have you most excited and which ones have you fearful of the impact they could have on society?
Well, technology has become very much a double-edged sword, and you don't think about something like 30% of malls and stores closing as a technology story, but it really is, where Amazon's soaking up $20 billion in business every year, and it's causing 30% of malls and stores to close. So you don't need necessarily really advanced AI to displace many, many American workers. And to me, that's the thing we should be concerned about. There are 2.5 million call center workers in the United States whose jobs could be lost to AI in the next 5 to 10 years, 3.5 million truck drivers, hundreds of thousands of limo and taxi drivers, as well as things like insurance agents, financial advisors, bookkeepers, and on through the economy. AI is about to leave the hype stage and become commercially useful in many different settings.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think artificial intelligence is definitely a technology that's going to progress rapidly over the next few years. Let's jump to your freedom dividend. You have this plan you want to implement. It could also be called universal basic income, as you said, where every American receives $1,000 a month from the government. Could you explain this a little further, and where do you plan on getting the estimated $2 to $3 trillion that experts say would be required?
Yeah, so if you look at our country's history, universal basic income has been with us since the beginning. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country, called it the citizens' dividend. Martin Luther King championed it in 1967, called it a guaranteed minimum income. And it's what he was fighting for when he was killed in 1968. Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists signed a study championing it. And it was so mainstream, it passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Nixon as the Family Assistance Plan. And then 11 years later, Alaska passed a dividend where now everyone in Alaska gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year in oil money, no questions asked. And what they're doing for the people of Alaska with oil money, we can do for everyone in the United States with technology money. When people ask how you pay for it, you look up and you see that Amazon paid zero in federal taxes in 2018. That if we had a mechanism to get the American public sliver of every every Amazon transaction, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile, it would generate 800 billion in new revenue, which combined with the economic growth from putting $1,000 a month in everyone's hands, the cost savings on things like incarceration and homelessness services and emergency room healthcare, and the value gains from having a stronger, healthier, mentally healthier, more productive population would pay for a dividend of $1,000 a month. The cost is about 2 trillion, as you say, but we can pay for it easily. Our economy is up to 20 trillion, up 5 trillion in the last 12 years alone. And this will build a trickle up economy because most all of this money will just circulate through our communities and neighborhoods over and over again.
I think that's a really good point. And, in my opinion, there's going to come a time where we absolutely need to have basic income for everyone, because automation is going to reach a certain point where virtually nobody's going to have jobs unless you're into robotics or if you're the CEO of these companies.
Yeah, that's right. It is inevitable. The Fed estimates that 44% of American jobs are either repetitive manual or repetitive cognitive and could be subject to automation in the next number of years. And so if you accept that a universal basic income is only a matter of time, then you start thinking, okay, when do we do it? And then you realize that there will never be a clear signal. You're not going to know what quote unquote the right time is. But if you look around us right now, 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. We're seeing unprecedented levels of stress and mental illness and suicides and depression and drug overdoses, to a point where our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years, the first time in 100 years. Donald Trump won the White House because of this economic transformation. The time is now. The time was probably yesterday. And if you accept that we have to do it at some point, then we should do it as soon as possible, because it will alleviate untold human misery and give us more time to learn and adjust. Whereas if you go too late, it might be too late for the genie to go back in the bottle. Like, it's not like society will just magically reconstitute itself if we allow it to disintegrate.
Yeah, I hear people say that you're ahead of your time. Do you think you're ahead of your time?
No, man, I just seem like it because the other politicians are so behind the times. Like, I'm not a futurist, I'm a presentist. It's 2019. We have to get with the program.
And meanwhile, Republicans want to move backwards. At least that's the way it seems.
Oh, yeah, Donald Trump identified some of these problems, and then what were his responses? Turn the clock back, bring the jobs back, build a wall. It's all very retro. And we need to do the exact opposite of all that. We need to turn the clock forward. That's what my campaign's all about.
Yeah, I agree. President Trump governs as if nothing's changing and as if technology remains static. How much is this actually costing us, to countries like China and India, just staying in this static state as we seem to be in right now?
It's hard to put a dollar figure on it, but I'm just going to throw out a couple things that give you a sense of it. Number one is Congress got rid of the Office of Technology Assessment in 1995. So Congress literally has had no guidance on technology issues for 24 years. And you can imagine the economic harm that has done in terms of the fact that our legislation is so behind the curve. And in terms of our competition with China, they are pirating tens of billions of dollars in intellectual property every year. It's costing us in big ways. So there's a legitimate imbalance. But they are in danger of leapfrogging us in AI because they have access to more data that they can feed to their algorithms that make their AI smarter and stronger more quickly. And right now, so I'll give you an example. When AI beat the most talented Go player in the world, more Chinese watched that than watched the Super Bowl. That was like their Super Bowl. And it galvanized a national movement around trying to develop cutting edge AI technologies. In the US, virtually no one knows what you're talking about if you say, hey, AI beat the best Go player in the world. And so there's a very, very big gulf between their ambitions and technology and the US, where we're not really leading, certainly on a national level from the government. I mean, what we're doing right now is hoping that our strongest private firms are able to maintain a lead. But when I talk to those leaders, they say that, look, it's hard for them to compete with the Chinese government cutting multi-billion-dollar checks to essentially subsidize the computing infrastructure of AI firms in China.
Yeah, that's all very good points. And AI is something where the faster a nation like China kind of progresses, the faster that rate of increase in that progression is going to take place. And that's kind of scary, because if they get too big of a lead, then everything from defense to the economy is going to have an impact.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, AI is the kind of thing that if you get there first and your algorithm's smarter and you have access to data that we don't, like, it's not like we can somehow catch up unless we somehow either catch hold of the same data with innovation. And so you end up playing catch up in a way that you can never win, because the lead ends up compounding on itself. And that's one reason why trying to maintain some sort of collaborative atmosphere on AI is really imperative. And the way to maintain a collaborative atmosphere is to be one of the leaders.
To me, it's rather ironic that Republicans seem to embrace the idea of a trickle-down economy where big corporations and billionaires get tax breaks and added benefits. But then when it comes to helping the lower class and relying on, I guess you could call it a trickle-up economy, they claim that these ideologies are socialism. Do you see it as socialism?
Oh, well, yeah, this is capitalism where income doesn't start at zero. And when I talk to business owners and CEOs, they know that markets and businesses function better when people have money to spend, when consumers can participate in the market. So this is not something that neatly falls into what people think of as like their socialism, capitalism bucket. This is good for people. It's good for consumers. It's good for businesses.
Yeah, I want to switch gears here a little bit. You believe that we need a governmental department to oversee social media, I believe you said. What happens if in the future another president like Trump comes along and he or she tries to nominate individuals who would essentially weaponize social media as a political tool for themselves?
Well, the social media that I think needs to be paid attention to is the stuff that is leading our teenage like girls in particular, teenage girls, to have record levels of anxiety and depression. And that's clearly coincident with the adoption of smartphones and certain social media apps. And a friend of mine in Silicon Valley said that we have the smartest engineers in the world turning supercomputers into slot machines and dopamine delivery devices for teenagers, because that's why they get paid millions of dollars. And so parents are outgunned, kids are outgunned. And so if those are the financial incentives, then it's the government's role to say, okay, what are our incentives? Like what's good for our kids? So that's what I mean by trying to get into the guts of these social media apps. It's not necessarily trying to promulgate a particular set of like political ideas.
Yeah, that makes sense. Shifting gears again, I have to ask you, because I've been following this space for quite a while now. What are your thoughts on cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin?
I think it's similar to many other technologies where there's like a foundational technology like the blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and then there's a hype cycle that maybe gets ahead of its application, and then there's a roller coaster ride, and then at some point the underlying technology finds its footing and then grows and becomes very important. So right now we're in the roller coaster phase, but the underlying technology of the blockchain could be incredibly valuable and transformative in many, many arenas. And so, to me, it's always the right thing to do to try and invest in those frontier technologies, because in this case, the potential is vast. I mean, you could imagine a world where you can have people not have to deal with like accounting firms and law firms and like a whole lot of very complex intermediaries, because everything is transparent and untouchable, and everyone trusts in it. I mean, like that's an incredible world to be in, and that's something that we should be investing in.
I know there was one Democratic congressman who came out against Bitcoin. I think it was last week, and he's urging other congressmen to get on and actually ban it in America. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that would end up just pushing a lot of it underground. It would push a lot of it, like the activity, to other countries. Um, uh, it would do more harm than good, in my opinion. It would also mean that the U.S. is once again looking backwards, where if there is something new happening, then we're trying to get rid of it while other countries are investing in it.
This last week, the Supreme Court has been in the news because of these abortion laws passed in Alabama and Georgia, and I think Missouri. You've called for an 18-year term limit for Supreme Court justices. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and do you think Congress should also have term limits?
Yeah, that's a great question. Those laws in Alabama and other states concerning abortion are very, very backward looking and troubling, and the opposite of the direction we should be heading. So 18-year term limits for Supreme Court justices, yes. And also, there's nothing in the Constitution about the number of Supreme Court justices. I mean, if we have to add some more, I think it would be a fine way to go, in part because it would depoliticize it and make it less of a crisis every time a justice steps down if we had 17 or 21 of them instead of 9,
Yeah. I guess the feedback on that would be then what stops the next president from adding another 9, or you know what I mean?
Uh, yeah, I mean, like that. There's certainly, there's some ups and downs, but even then, I think we'd be in a better spot than we are now. Because like these lifetime appointments and 9 justices, like the whole thing is so fraught. We're literally freaking out if an 86-year-old has a cold. I mean, like that sort of system doesn't make any sense. And so I think, like, given the flexibility in the Constitution around it, it's something that we should very much explore. Term limits for Congress people, I think that there are real problems with folks who just go to DC and just crouch there for decades and just stockpile, resources and everything else. Um, but like if you had constant turnover, then it would probably be even harder to get anything done because you just show up there new and fresh, and there'd be no organizing principles. So I'd be for a long-term term limit for Congress people. It would probably need to be on the longer time frame, so at least you could have some folks develop some seniority and some basis for governance and self-organization.
What's your opinion on healthcare and education? What would you do as president?
I'm for Medicare for all, universal health care. It makes no sense to have people more stressed out about paying for treatment than getting well, particularly in a country as advanced as ours. On the education side, I mean, I'm for putting $1,000 a month in everyone's hands, which would help make families stronger, give kids a better chance to learn. I think we need to reduce the cost of college, but also invest a ton in vocational training, because many of those jobs will be with us for a long time. I would forgive a lot of the student loan debt too, because that stuff is weighing down millions of Americans in a way that is not setting them up to succeed. And if we can't build an economy that our young people are inheriting in a way that they can buy homes and start businesses and start families, then we are doing ourselves a disservice. And so, to me, student loan debt is a big anchor on the hopes of many, many young people in particular.
I've heard a lot of people, both on the right and the left, say that you're one of the more radical candidates for 2020. But then again, we see that you are probably one of the candidates who has kind of attracted the eyes of Trump supporters as well. So it's kind of confusing there. What do you think of that? Do you think you're radical, and why do you think some Trump supporters are turning towards you as well?
Well, I think I'm trying to improve the lives of tens of millions of Americans. If that makes me radical, then I'm happy to take that. And the fact that there are people from all points in the political spectrum that are excited about it, I think is exciting. Because if you're a Democrat and you want to beat Donald Trump, then the strongest candidate would be someone who can peel off Trump supporters and libertarians and independents and conservatives, as well as Democrats and progressives. So the fact that our campaign has that kind of broad appeal, to me, is exactly what Democrats should be looking for.
All right, great. Before we conclude things, I just want to close things off, and I want to give you a few topics, and you just describe each topic with a single sentence. Are you ready?
This is fun. Yeah, let's do it.
Amazon.com.
Quasi-monopoly.
Donald Trump.
A symptom of this disease of economic insecurity.
Coal.
The energy source of the past.
Artificial intelligence.
The future and getting stronger every day.
All right, great. So if somebody wants to support your candidacy, how can they do that? And do you have a website?
Yes, it's yang2020.com, or you can just Google Andrew Yang. We have over 110,000 donors already, and the average donation is only $19. So we joke that our fans are even cheaper than Bernie's. This is a very cheap gang to join. But if you think that every American deserves $1,000 a month, please do throw $1 or $5 into the bucket, and let's take this case all the way to the debate stage in June and July, and then all the way to the White House.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining us, and maybe we can talk to you a little bit further down the road.
Yeah, I enjoyed this a great deal, man. Would love to catch up again.
All right, great. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this week's edition of Krassencast. Thank you, as always, to all of our listeners. We wouldn't have a show without you. If you haven't already done so, please be sure to check us out on Patreon at Krassencast.com, and be sure to subscribe on Apple iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube.